Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm GOVT and these are the headlines. Syria's Foreign Minister Faisal Mikdad says Israel is behind the killing of Iran's top nuclear scientist. He was quoted by state media as saying the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh will fuel tensions in the region. Meanwhile, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif asked the international community to condemn such terrorist attacks. In India, thousands of farmers have continued their protest over new reforms they say are against their interests. The protesters blocked major roads in New Delhi, raising fears of fresh clashes with the security forces. Opposition leader Rahul Gandhi has blamed Prime Minister Narendra Modi's arrogance for the crisis. In Ethiopia, government forces have begun an offensive to capture the capital of restive Tigray region. Rebel leader Sam Mekele is under heavy bombardment by Ethiopian forces. Tens of thousands of people have already fled into Sudan to avoid violence since the 4th of November. Coronavirus infections in the US have shot past 13 million while claiming over 264,000 lives in the country. India's COVID-19 infections have topped 9.3 million with over 41,000 new cases and 485 deaths overnight. Pakistan has registered over 3,000 cases and 45 fatalities overnight as the death toll tops 7,900. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 1.4 million lives with over 61.5 million infections. Red Bull's Max Verstappen beat seven-time Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton in a qualifying round of the Bahrain Grand Prix. He lapped the 5.4-kilometer desert track in almost 1.5 minutes. Hamilton teammate Valtteri Bottas finished off third. Those were the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Syria's Foreign Minister Faisal Mikdad says Israel is behind the killing of Iran's top nuclear scientist. He was quoted by the state media as saying the assassination of Mohsen Fakhrizadeh will fuel tensions in the region. More in this report. Iran has vowed to avenge the killing of its top scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh in an ambush on his car by gunmen near Tehran. President Hassan Rouhani says Iran would retaliate at a time of its choosing. Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said the cowardly assassination is a blatant challenge to international law and humanitarian rules. He asked the world community to condemn such terrorist attacks. Fakhrizadeh's killing threatens to escalate tensions over Iran's nuclear program with the US and Israel. The United Nations and Germany have urged all the sides to refrain from any step that could lead to a further escalation of the situation. Iran has vowed to avenge the killing of its top scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh in an ambush on his car. Dr. Satare, thank you very much for your time at Indus News. Iran has warned the US and Israel against any misadventures after killing of the scientist Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. Do you see further escalation in tensions between Washington and Tehran?
Well, yes and no. Yes, because the U.S. and the Zionist regime have given Iran every reason to show more, to escalate the tensions between the two countries. But no, because Iran acts very patiently and based on logic and long-term interest of not only its own people, but also the interest of the region. So we don't know what we are going to expect, but this won't be left without a response from Iran, because last year, in less than a year ago, Iran's top general Sardar Soleimani was assassinated, and now we have yet another nuclear scientist, our top physicist, assassinated, and the U.S. and Israel shamelessly and proudly take responsibility for that. This cannot be left without a response. We know that Iran is going to act, but how this is going to happen and in what manner the two countries are going to show opposition to each other and enmity to each other, this is not clear at this moment.
Dr. Siddiqui, President Hassan Rouhani says Iran will retaliate at the proper time. Can Tehran strike Israeli or U.S. infrastructures in the Middle East as it did in Iraq after killing of General Qasem Soleimani?
Well, the strike in the U.S. base in Iraq, as Iranian officials have also described it, was just a slap and not a retaliation for the assassination of a very important military figure of Iran, the top general Soleimani. So I don't think Iran has yet responded to that attack. And maybe we can expect some attacks on some Israeli base or some Israeli, military base somewhere. But we're not sure. We cannot say what Iran is going to do or what exactly they're going to target, because, as I said, Iran acts with a lot of composure and patience, and they're waiting for the proper time and the proper target to attack on. But what I know is that inside Iran, people are very angry, and it's not only sadness over losing, national figures. It's national figures, but it's also angry. A lot of rage and anger because state terrorism is happening in this region, and no international entity and neither the international community are taking any action. So if necessary, Iran would have to act on its own in order to restrain and limit the acts of terrorism that are coming from the Zionist regime and its lords in Washington.
Dr. Sitar Siddiqui, thank you very much for your time, for talking to Indus News. We really appreciate that. And now moving on, in Iraq, the death toll from clashes between anti-government protesters and supporters of cleric Muqtada al-Sadr has risen to 6, with 60 others wounded. The violence erupted as thousands of Sadr supporters hit the streets in a show of force as the preparations ramp up for June parliamentary elections. Al-Sadr, who leads the largest bloc in Iraq's parliament, said he expects his movement to win a majority of seats. Local authorities have sacked the city's police chief and launched an investigation into the incident, while other cities, including Kurt and Amara, introduced security measures besides curfew in Syria. Afghanistan's capital city Kabul has been rocked by 2 simultaneous magnetic IED blasts. This comes amid a dramatic increase in explosions in Kabul, specifically magnetic IED that are attached to vehicles. In a statement, Kabul police said 7 people have been wounded in both the attacks. Police said the first blast occurred in Khair Khana area, while the second took place at Umeed Subs township. Meanwhile, in Helmand province, a magnetic bomb blast has killed 1 man and wounded another. No group has yet claimed the responsibility of the attacks. Last week, 10 people were killed and over 50 wounded after 23 rockets hit the capital. In India, thousands of farmers have continued their demonstration over new reforms they say are against their interests. The protesters blocked major roads into New Delhi, raising fears of fresh clashes with security forces. They chanted slogans against the ruling BJP, demanding the revocation of the legislation passed in September. The new laws can pave the way for the government to stop buying grain at guaranteed prices. Farmers fear the reforms will leave them at the mercy of big corporates. Opposition leader Rahul Gandhi has blamed Prime Minister Narendra Modi's arrogance for the crisis. On the sidelines of an OIC ministerial meeting in Niamey, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has held discussions with the delegations from the UAE, Sudan, Somalia and Niger. According to the Foreign Office, Qureshi discussed ways to bolster cooperation with the respective countries. Qureshi said Pakistan attached high importance to its relations with Africa. Meeting UAE's Minister of State Reem Al-Hashmi, he highlighted difficulties being faced by the Pakistani citizens with regards to the UAE visa. Qureshi underscored the need to address the issue as soon as possible. Judge Hassan Brahim Taha has been elected as the new Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. Outgoing Secretary General Yusuf Al-Uthaymeen has welcomed Taha at the 47th session of the OIC Council of Foreign Ministers in Niger. In a statement, Saudi Foreign Minister said the new appointment fulfills the kingdom's commitment towards the African group. He said the kingdom offers full support to the new Secretary General. Chad's President Idris Deby has also congratulated Taha on becoming the head of the OIC. In Ethiopia, the government forces have begun an offensive to capture the capital of the restive Tigray region. Rebel leader Mekelle is under heavy bombardment by Ethiopian forces. This comes after Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's ultimatum for Tigray leaders to surrender expired on Wednesday. The Ethiopian military has been fighting forces in Tigray since November the 4th in order to oust the local government. The UN warns of possible war crimes in the offensive on Mekelle. Hundreds of people are believed to have been killed, while tens of thousands have fled the fighting into neighboring Sudan. More stories to follow, but right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome. This is the news just in from the capital Niamey of Niger, where the OIC has unanimously adopted a resolution reaffirming its unequivocal support to the Kashmir cause. At the 47th session of the OIC in Niamey, the Council of Foreign Ministers categorically rejected India's unilateral actions in the occupied region. They recognized that Jammu and Kashmir is the core dispute between Pakistan and India, and its resolution is imperative for regional peace. They told India to refrain from taking any steps to alter the demography of occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The resolution also condemned human rights violations being committed by Indian troops in the valley. It also deplored Indian state sponsorship of terrorism against the people of Kashmir. It said India is exploiting current COVID-19 crisis to intensify its crackdown against Kashmiris. The resolution urged the international community to review their engagements with India as it is disregarding international laws. Kashmir has been under an inhumane curfew since India revoked its special status in August last year. Indian troops have killed hundreds of people and detained thousands to snub dissent. The OIC has unanimously adopted a resolution reaffirming its unequivocal support to the Kashmir cause. At the 47th session of the OIC in Niamey, the Council of Foreign Ministers categorically rejected India's unilateral actions in the occupied region. They recognized that Jammu and Kashmir is the core dispute between Pakistan and India, and its resolution is imperative for the regional peace. They told India to refrain from taking any steps to alter the demography of occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The resolution also condemned human rights violations being committed by Indian troops in the valley. It also deplored Indian state sponsorship of terrorism against the people of Kashmir. It said India is exploiting current COVID-19 crisis to intensify its crackdown against Kashmiris. The resolution also urged the international community to review their engagements with India as it is disregarding international laws. Kashmir has been under an inhumane curfew since India revoked its special status in August last year. Indian troops have killed hundreds of people and detained thousands to snub dissent. Now moving on, at least 7 people have been killed in a suicide attack in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. Police said 10 others were wounded as the blast went off in an ice cream shop near an international airport. The Al-Qaeda-linked Al-Shabaab extremist group has claimed the responsibility for the attack. The attack comes only hours after the U.S. Acting Defense Secretary Christopher Miller made unannounced visit to Mogadishu. Last week in Mogadishu, a suicide attack killed 5 people, including Somalia's military and police officials. The fresh wave of violence in Somalia has erupted after reports that U.S. plans to withdraw its military personnel from the country. In France, thousands of people rallied to the streets of Paris over a new security law. Protesters say the law undermines the media's ability to report and criticize police brutality in the country. They are calling for the law to be withdrawn, claiming that it contradicts with the fundamental public freedoms of our republic. The protesters launched fireworks and put up barricades while pelting rocks at the police. In response, security forces have fired tear gas at the marching protesters in an attempt to disperse them. President Emmanuel Macron has condemned the beating of the black music producer Michael Zackler and called the police brutality shameful for France. He said the government will have to find a way to restore public confidence in the force. A U.S. federal appeals court has dismissed Trump campaign's lawsuit that sought to block Joe Biden's election win in Pennsylvania. A 3-judge panel ruled that charges required specific allegations and proof, none offered by Trump's lawsuit.
The Third Circuit Court of Appeals had been asked to dismiss the Trump campaign's attempts to invalidate millions of mail-in votes in Pennsylvania. Circuit Judge Stephanos Bibas, on behalf of the panel, termed free and fair elections lifeblood of democracy. Bibas said charges of unfairness were serious, but this case was without merit as no evidence was presented. In a tweet following the decision, Trump campaign lawyer Jenna Ellis said they will go to the Supreme Court. The battleground state certified Biden's win by 80,000 votes earlier this week. Meanwhile, a recount in Wisconsin demanded by Trump campaign ended, increasing President-elect Joe Biden's victory margin. The developments have dealt major blows to Trump's attempt to overturn presidential election outcome. In another development, former U.S. cybersecurity director has termed Trump's election fraud allegations farcical. In an interview, Chris Krebs said the allegations of foreign countries manipulating voting machines were baseless. Time is running out on U.S. President as the states have until December 8 to resolve election disputes.
Belarus President Alexander Lukashenko says he will step down once a new constitution is adopted. During a meeting in Minsk, Lukashenko said he is not amending the constitution for himself and will leave office under the reformed constitution. Lukashenko said the current constitution needs reforms as too much power has been given in the hands of the president. He pledged to conduct fair elections free from any fabrications under the new constitution. He added it will be worse if a war is imposed on the country, and the situation is better now without a war. Demonstrators protesting since the August polls have dismissed the presidential call for reform as a stalling tactic. Malaysia's Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin says the country would hold general elections after COVID-19 pandemic is over. Muhyiddin made the announcement in a speech at a virtual annual general meeting of his Bersatu party. Muhyiddin said people were fed up of politicking, pledging to return the mandate to them. He said people wanted political leaders to help them rather than constantly fight for power. Muhyiddin's government has held on to power with a 2-seat majority in the parliament. His administration has successfully averted a political crisis by securing parliament support for the largest ever budget. Japan's Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga has called for a joint effort to tackle an increasingly severe security environment. Suga made his remarks at the annual review ceremony held at Iruma Air Base in Saitama Prefecture. Addressing the ceremony, Suga said the security environment surrounding Tokyo has become increasingly severe. He stressed the significance of joint efforts to prevail in unconventional battlefields such as outer space, cyberspace, and electromagnetic fields.
In recent years, the security environment surrounding Japan is increasingly severe, and it is required to deal with areas not only in conventional land, sea, and air, but also in new ones such as outer space, cyberspace, electromagnetic fields. Under this situation, it is getting more difficult for each organization to deal with separately. It is important that we break barriers between ground, maritime, and air self-defense forces and tackle the challenges together.
In Chile, hundreds of protesters took to the streets of Santiago, calling on the government to bring reforms and control inequality in the country. Riot police used water cannons to disperse the demonstrators. The South American country has been witnessing protests for more than a year now. The unabating demonstrations called for reform to pension, healthcare, and education systems. Earlier last month, Chileans voted in favor of a new charter to replace country's Pinochet-era constitution. In Brazil, people have returned to polls in 57 cities to vote in the runoffs of the municipal elections. The country has seen a surge in violence, including assassinations and attacks on candidates. Brazil's electoral authority says 200 incidents of murder or attempted murder were reported during the 2 months of campaigning. In a report, it said this year has seen a surge compared to just 46 incidents in previous municipal elections in 2016. Violence has always had its place in Brazilian politics, particularly in the Wild West or poor states. The violence in the country is hurting all parties as many political killings remain unresolved. Coronavirus infections in the US have shot past 13 million while claiming over 264,000 lives in the country. India's COVID-19 infections have topped 9.3 million with over 41,000 new cases and 485 deaths overnight. Globally, the COVID-19 death toll has exceeded 1.4 million with over 61.5 million infections. More in this report.
Coronavirus situation remains grim all around the world as the holiday season is expected to propel the next wave of infections. Latin America's Peru, with one of the highest COVID-19 death rates in the world, has signed a deal with Pfizer to secure over 23 million vaccine doses for around 70% of its population. With the daily infections rising in Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said majority of the country's population will be vaccinated by September next year.
We've been collaborating with the Canadian Armed Forces and their logistical abilities for a long while now, and that's why I'm so pleased to announce Major General Denis Fortin, who is going to be working closely with PHAC on logistics and delivery of this greatest mobilization effort Canada has seen since the Second World War.
Europe also continues to register devastating statistics of COVID-19 cases from all over the continent. Italy's death toll remains second highest in Europe as the country reported over 800 deaths for the second consecutive day. The virus is again on the rise in Turkey as its daily death toll hits another high for fifth consecutive day. The World Health Organization has urged countries to stay vigilant even if they see a fall in their coronavirus cases.
You've heard us say this before, but we really need to emphasize this again. Do not let your guard down. It is good to see the measures taking effect and transmission going down, but it is not time to let up. And it's time to even scale up.
Meanwhile, once Australia's COVID-19 hotspot, Victoria State has announced it has gone 29 days without detecting any new infections.
In Pakistan, 45 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours, raising the death toll to over 7,900. The health ministry says more than 3,000 tested positive for the disease overnight. The ministry said there are more than 46,000 active COVID-19 cases in the country. It said out of over 392,000 countrywide cases, more than 337,000 have recovered so far. The highest number of infections are reported in Sindh with over 170,000 cases, while Punjab has reported over 117,000 cases. In the capital Islamabad, over 29,000 have been infected so far. A delegation of Indian Sikh pilgrims has arrived in Pakistan to take part in the celebrations of Guru Nanak's 551st birthday. Guru Nanak was born in Nankana Sahib in 1469. Sikhs across the world will celebrate the birth of first Sikh Guru on the 30th of November as Guru Nanak Jayanti. This year, in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, Pakistan approved visas of 325 pilgrims. The first delegation of its kind since the outbreak is visiting Pakistan from November the 27th to December the 1st.
Due to the coronavirus pandemic, permission has been granted to visit only Nankana Sahib, but devotees had this desire to visit Panja Sahib, Sacha Sauda and Sri Kartarpur Sahib.
In India, a shocking video of a stray dog nibbling at the dead body of a girl inside a government hospital has led to public outrage. The girl, who died in an accident, was kept on a stretcher for post-mortem in the hospital in Uttar Pradesh. No hospital employee was there to attend the body. The family of the victim has blamed the hospital administration for negligence. At least 8 people have died in Somalia after Cyclone Gary hit country's semi-autonomous Puntland region. UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs said over 42,000 people have been displaced from the region. It said Gary disrupted livelihoods by destroying fishing gear, killing livestock and flooding agricultural land and crops. UN's Food and Agriculture Agency said the flooded farmlands can further exacerbate the already worst locust plague in the country. It said the cyclone will allow the immature desert locust swarms in neighboring states to mature faster and lay eggs. Somalia's locust plague is part of a once-in-a-generation succession of swarms driven by unusual weather patterns. The United Nations Relief Agency for Palestine Refugees has warned that it is on the cliff's edge due to lack of funding. The financial needs have been compounded by the pandemic and the U.S. move of ending funds to UNRWA. More in this report.
The United Nations Relief Agency for Palestine Refugees is at the brink of collapse due to the non-availability of required funds. UNRWA provides its services to about 5.3 million Palestinian refugees. But it is suffering from a stifling financial crisis since the United States has frozen all of its support for the agency since January. The U.S. claims that it is not satisfied with the way the agency works, which is being criticized by Israel. Speaking at a news conference, UNRWA's Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarani says the agency is on the cliff's edge due to the lack of funding.
If you go from one country to the other one, you will meet despair and distress. And I do believe, and this is a message I am conveying to the international community, there is no better investment than investing in UNRWA and in the human development of Palestinian refugees if you want to invest in stability in the region at a time the region is as volatile as it is.
In Iraq, a team of 50 members is practicing Japanese martial arts ninja in deep mountains. Without availability of basic facilities, they have aimed to participate in international competitions and become well known around the world. More in this report.
Dressed up in traditional Japanese martial arts ninja, a team of 50 members practices a mixture of acrobatic and combat techniques in Iraq. They use shouting, fire, and spears to boost their strength and performance.
We are the Soran Ninja team, and we established the team 3 months ago.
Despite lack of support and facilities, these athletes have to leap over many other obstacles.
The difference between training inside the hall and in nature is that in the hall there are only 4 walls and nothing happens within these 4 walls. Outside in nature it is better physically and mentally because you have to adapt to the climate. A ninja needs cold, hot and mild weather to develop the capacity to deal with any weather.
The team hopes to participate in international competitions and become well known around the world.
It's time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. The U.S. authorities have launched an investigation into 115,000 Tesla vehicles. The move comes after the auto safety regulator received 43 complaints regarding front suspension's failure. National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said the probe concerns a front suspension safety issue in the vehicles. The agency said preliminary evaluation targeted 2015 to 2017 Model X and Model X vehicles. The agency said Tesla issued a service bulletin in 2017 saying a manufacturing condition can result in front suspension failure. Earlier, the agency said it was expanding a separate probe into about 159,000 Tesla Model S and Model X vehicles. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and Irish Prime Minister Michael Martin have discussed progress in the UK-EU trade negotiations. Over a phone call, Johnson presented his commitment to reach a deal that respects the sovereignty of the country. In a statement, the UK government said the leaders reaffirmed to prioritise the 1998 Good Friday peace deal. The deal effectively ended Northern Ireland's 30 years of sectarian violence and created institutions for cross-border cooperation. Ireland's Prime Minister has said there is still time for a good result in trade talks. Meanwhile, European Union Brexit chief negotiator Michel Barnier has arrived in London for face-to-face Brexit trade talks. China says it will introduce a total ban on the import of any solid waste starting from the beginning of 2021. This comes in a notice jointly issued by the Environment and Commerce Ministries. The notice said breach of the law may entail criminal liability. It said any import of solid wastes will be stopped and the storage. The notice added a recycling of foreign solid waste on its territory will be prohibited from 2021. For its industrial development in the 1990s, China increasingly needed a raw material, forcing the country to accumulate large solid waste. But since 2017, China has begun to ban the import of some types of solid waste to improve the environmental situation. Red Bull's Max Verstappen beat 7-time Formula One world champion Lewis Hamilton in a qualifying round of Bahrain Grand Prix. He lapped the 5.4-kilometer desert track in almost 1.5 minutes. Verstappen was 2.6 seconds ahead of Hamilton, who ended as the quickest man in the desert on Friday. Hamilton teammate Valtteri Bottas finished off third. New Zealand beat Argentina 38-0 in a step further to clinch the Tri-Nations title at Newcastle. New Zealand's Dane Coles led the team 10-0 at half-time. Patrick Topolotto gave a final blow to the rivals in overtime. Argentina and Australia have 6 points each and will face each other in the final game of the tournament next weekend. New Zealand will secure the title if Argentina or Australia do not win the match by a substantial margin. In cricket, England beat South Africa in the first T20 of the 3-match series at Newlands, Cape Town. The visitors chased the 180-run target with 4 balls to spare and 5 wickets in hand. South Africa managed a total of 179 runs on a loss of 6 after being put into bat first. Faf du Plessis top scored for the Proteas with 58 runs on 40 deliveries. In reply, England were 3 for 34 when Johnny Bairstow came to the rescue. Bairstow was declared man of the match for his match-winning innings of 86 runs on 48 deliveries. The second T20 of the series will be played in Paul on Sunday. Indian players will lose 20% of their match fees for slow over rate against Australia in the first one-day international. Virat Kohli's men were found 1 over short of their target in the stipulated time and were penalised by the match referee David Boone. On-field umpires Rod Tucker and Sam Nogiski, TV umpire Paul Rifle and fourth umpire Jared Abood levelled the charge. After the match, Australian Stephen Smith said it was the longest 50-over game he had been part of. India lost the match by 66 runs at the Sydney Cricket Ground. The second of the 3-match 50-over series will be played at the same venue on Sunday. India is on a long tour in Australia consisting of 3 ODIs, 3 T20s and 4 Test matches. A sensational late Mohammad Magdi goal gave Al Ahly victory over Cairo rivals in Zamalek in the African Champions League final. The teams were locked at 1-1 at the Cairo International Stadium when Magdi collected a loose ball and volleyed into the corner of the net. Ahly took an early lead when Amr Solia headed an in-swinging corner into the net inside first 5 minutes. But Zamalek grew more dominant as the half wore on and Shebila scored an equalizer for them. But Magdi settled the contest with his own moment of brilliance as Ahly won the title for the first time in 7 years. The win gave them a record-extending 9th African Champions League crown. Newcastle United beat Crystal Palace 2-0 in a Premier League clash at Selhurst Park Stadium. Callum Wilson and Joelinton scored goals for the Magpies. Joelinton set up Callum Wilson for the first in the 88th minute and added his side's second a minute and a half later. It was Joelinton's first Premier League goal of the season and a third in the top flight since joining Newcastle in July last year. Joelinton had gone 16 Premier League games without a goal or assist before grabbing one of each in Friday's victory. The result moves Newcastle up to 10th in the table, while Palace slip to 13th. Two boxing legends Mike Tyson and Roy Jones Jr. weighed in for their exhibition bout scheduled to take place this Sunday. The 8-round fight will take place at the Staples Center in Los Angeles. Tyson has not fought since a loss to Kevin McBride in 2005, and the 51-year-old Jones, who has simultaneously held a record 7 belts, last fought in 2018. The rounds of the exhibition fight will be 60 seconds shorter than usual, with just 2 minutes instead of 3. Internet star Jake Paul also weighed in for his fight against former NBA point guard. World Table Tennis innovative event in Macau is down to the closing stages with only 4 women and 4 men left in the competition. The top 4 seeds in the last 8 were given a choice to pick their opponents for the next round. But things didn't go according to plan as number 1 Xu Xin of China was defeated by his choice, Sweden's Matthias Falk 3-1. China's Ma Long and Lin Gaoyong proved better judges, opting to take on Jong Yeon-sik of South Korea and compatriot Fang Bo respectively. China's Wang Chu-chin beat Brazil's Hugo Calderano 3-2 in a nail-biting encounter. In the semi-finals, Falk will be up against Wang, while Lin and Ma are paired up. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.